Welcome to your Artsy Girl podcast. I am your host, Christina Carrera. This is a podcast about art, poetry, and anything about creativity. Sit back, relax, and get your dose of brain food to get your creative juices flowing. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 12. Today's featured guest is Floyd K. Takeuchi. He is a writer-photographer who specializes in Hawaii, Japan, and Oceania. He has had 5 solo photo exhibits in Japan and 15 shows, mostly solo exhibits in Honolulu, Hawaii. He was awarded Best in Show in one of Hawaii's largest juried photo exhibits. A collection of his photographs were acquired by the College of Micronesia-FSM as part of that college's 25th anniversary last year. He has had commissions to photograph in the Federated States of Micronesia and Marshall Islands for new hotel developments in those island nations. Floyd has also spent more than 4 decades working as a journalist and media executive in Hawaii, Guam, Fiji, and Japan. He has published 4 books based on his photography and writing, along with an ebook that includes more than 30 videos of the best dancers in Oceania performing at the Festival of Pacific Arts. An American with degrees from Boston University and the University of Hawaii, Floyd was born and raised in the Marshall Islands, and his family lived in Saipan in the Northern Mariana Islands for nearly 20 years. Please welcome my featured guest, Floyd Takeuchi. Hi, Floyd. Welcome to the show. I thank you so much for setting some time for me to discuss your work. I taught at College of Micronesia and saw you speak at a few engagements there and learned of your work as a talented photographer in the Pacific region. I would like to get to know you a little more. I understand you received your BA at Boston University and hence had a tremendous career as a journalist and media executive. Can you fill in the blanks for us a little bit? Like, first, where were you born and where did you grow up?
Well, I was born in the Marshall Islands on an atoll called Majuro, which is the current capital of what is now the Republic of the Marshall Islands. My parents were there for 3 decades with the American administration that used to oversee the islands after the Second World War, up until the mid-'80s. And spent most of my life either living in the Marshalls or Saipan. They moved there in the 60s, which was the capital of the then Trust Territory of the Pacific Islands. And then I worked on Guam for a while before moving back to Hawaii and then basing my career out of here for the most part, except for a couple jaunts when I worked in Suva, Fiji, and I also worked in Washington, D.C., and then Tokyo, Japan.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you've had such a unique childhood experience. I mean, I grew up in the Philippines post-Vietnam War, and I say that I have had a unique childhood experience. But I can only imagine, growing up in the Majuro during the 50s, 60s there, and how that may have influenced your artwork, your vision, your perspectives. And as a journalist, I can see how your photos accompany a narrative, a story, if you will. In the case of Majuro, Essays from an Atoll, Micronesia's remarkable Xavier High School, and Pacifica, the Festival of Pacific Arts. Those are the 3 books that you have compiled with your stories, your essays, and photos. Can you tell us about these fine collections and the story behind them?
Well, the background is that I did have much of my career has been as a regular reporter or editor or publisher, and then I ran a couple of media companies for a while as president. And I took a couple companies through 9/11 and then the meltdown in 2008. And at that point, I just pretty much decided it was time to get back to go back to the create and refill the creative well. Yeah. And, so I stepped away from corporate journalism and focused on getting back to storytelling. a little bit different because this is primarily photography as opposed to writing, and it had been flipped before. And when making that change, I told myself I'm going to do this for a couple of reasons. And one of them was to tell stories that I thought needed to be told that people weren't telling for whatever reason. But the other one was to do it from a perspective of being focusing on sort of three values in my work as a photographer.
Okay.
One of them was to focus on beauty, to respect traditional values, and to honor traditions and culture. And so that fit very well with all three of the books, which were fairly long. The Majuro, the Essays from an Atoll, was based on some work I did for the Marshall Islands Visitors Authority. They asked me to help them develop some new material for their promotion. You know, they get 3,000 visitors a year, so almost anything will help. But this was I spent a couple of weeks there, and of course I knew the place fairly well. So we did some writing about issues like food and local cultural issues and religion, and just living on a place, Majuro Atoll, it's about 1.5 square miles of dry land.
Right.
When I was there in the 50s as a young boy, it was 2,000 people, and today it's closer to 26,000. So it's very, very different, but
right.
there's
and
still a pace of life.
I'm sorry, but it's like a long strip of land,
well,
right?
Think of a necklace. And, a very thin necklace of crushed coral and coconut trees. That's pretty much an atoll with a big lagoon. That's pretty much it. Yeah, so I heard that, you can just drive from one point to the end. And in how long? Like how long does it take from one end of the island to the other one? Well, you can't do the full circle, but you can do part of it. And that would take at typical local speeds, 45 minutes, 50 minutes. It's relatively
very small.
But today, the Majuro's is chock full of taxis and local entrepreneurs, and in the 50s, there were maybe 4 vehicles, so it's a slightly different place. And then so all the books are really about local values at work and trying to survive and really thrive in a different type of environment.
Now, you've done that one about Xavier High School. When I taught at the College of Micronesia, I did have students that went to school there, and I've heard of the stories. And when I saw the cover photo of your book about Xavier High School, and you captured that moment well with the students, did you go to Xavier?
I did not. I actually did. I was in a somewhat similar school in Hawaii, in boarding school. But I did spend about a month on campus. The director was a good friend of mine, and I asked him I told him I wanted to do the book, but if I got myself out there, could he put me up? And he said, sure, happy to. And he said, I'll put you up with me in Jesuit house. And I thought, well, that sounds very comfortable. And I flew out there, and so as you know, from Honolulu, it's about almost a 10-hour day with 5 or 6 stops. So it's a long day. I got there, and the school is up on a very nice bluff overlooking the island of Ueno, a former site of a Japanese communication station for the Japanese Navy during the war. And but the road up there is just ridiculously bad. You have to go 5 miles an hour and just about get out and push sometimes. But we got got in on the late afternoon, went up to the school, dropped off my stuff, and he said, we're going to have a mass in town. Would you like to come in with us? And I said, sure, I'd love to. There's just a few hundred students there. It's a small school. And went back down to town and photographed the mass, and finally got back to the campus at about 9 o'clock, and the father said, I'm going to sleep. We were shared a bungalow with those two separate bedrooms and a bathroom, shared bath. He says, the bath's all yours. And I got in there and take a shower and realized there was no shower head. There was a spigot, which was okay. And then I realized there was only one faucet. It was for cold water and into a bucket. That's it. And it was learning
It was not a hotel.
It was not a hotel, and but it was a great experience. I spent a month there with 2 different trips, and hopefully the book, the photographs capture the spirit of the place.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I would like to see that alone because, I heard of the secondhand stories. I'm sure your book will bring that to life, and also the Festival of Pacifica rather. Now, can you explain a little more about that? This is a get together of traditional dancers from all over the region.
It's been a program held every 4 years since 1972.
Wow.
And they move it around the Pacific. It's one of the greatest cultural events in the world, really, where you have over 2,000 performers, most of them dancers. Some of them are carvers, some of them are artists. But over 2,000 performers from 20-some countries and territories descend on one place for 2 weeks and perform. They're the best of the best. So you see some amazing dancing and have a chance to get up close to and meet some of these incredible performers. And I covered the 2008 festival in American Samoa. And I was there for 2.5 weeks covering this thing, and it was a particularly good one to cover because the venue allowed accredited correspondents and photographers to get very close. And the book is really not so much a performance-focused book, although the ebook is. There's a companion ebook that has 33 videos, mostly performances. But it's primarily, I decided as I was getting into it, and it was my last film project where I shot film only. But it was a chance to do what amounted to a major portrait book, and I decided to make every photograph in some ways a portrait of the person, as opposed to trying to capture the nuances of all the performances.
Yes,
and, had a very good time with it.
Yeah. Well, as an observer, however, when I look at your photographs, I don't necessarily see an image through a reporter's lens, but more of a visual artist. Not only the composition and the technical rendering of your subject matter, but how you capture the moment so beautifully. I did see some of your photos that you have on your website, and is some of it part of the Festival of Pacific Arts?
Yes, it is. And so your comment is interesting because one of the values that I try to follow in my photography was best said by David Allen Harvey, the photojournalist who's done work primarily for the National Geographic. He's a fabulous feature photographer, and he's got a quote that kind of burns my brain of, you don't take a photograph of what you see, you take a photograph of what you feel. And I try to capture that. And that's really what I try to do with every photograph I take.
Why photography as opposed to anything else? Or do you identify yourself primarily as a photographer or both, a photographer and writer?
I do both. I do primarily photography these days, but I've done photography in some fashion. Well, I got my first camera when I was 10, 1963, so it's a long time ago. I enjoy the process of trying to present an emotion captured in a two-dimensional way, now in pixels rather than film, but for the most part. But it's just there's a little bit of a technical challenge, but really it's about interpreting a scene and trying to capture the sense of emotion that you have when you. Well, as I tell folks when I do occasional workshops, I would say you can't do a really good portrait unless you fall in love with your subject, and it's that sense of connection. And so, particularly in the Pacifica book, I tried really hard to get as close as possible to the subjects. So there's one of a group of young teenage dancers from the eastern Papua New Guinea. They were preparing to go on stage, and the girls are topless, and they're kind of they're totally zoned out on me, which is great because I'd been around for a while. And they were focusing on the stage, and there's that sense of anticipation in their faces, but physically getting close so that the viewer, the reader, in this case of a book, but the viewer of a print or in the show or something like that, will have a sense that there's the subject of the photographs obviously knows I'm there, because I'm just too close not to know I'm there. But there's an implicit relationship between the subject and the photographer about the situation. Right. And I want that to come through.
So it's not like you went to a visual fine arts school to learn photography or anything like that. But how did you learn these techniques as far as, applying fine arts techniques to your work?
Well, I learned technical stuff in high school. I was very fortunate to have a teacher who was a enthusiast and taught us, a bunch of us, how to work a darkroom, a black and white darkroom. And that's, I think, a really important part of being a good technical photographer. You need to understand that. The other stuff comes just from the personal journey you go on, and part of it is being inspired by other artists, photographers or painters. I think early on in my photography career, I was in college when I was in Boston. I actually lived across the park from the Museum of Fine Arts, and they had, which was where I was introduced to John Singer Sargent, the painter, the society painter. But he has just had a magnificent way of handling light, and it's particularly as it glowed off skin. His very well-to-do clients, but they just glowed, and some people look at Turner's and at early morning light and go, "How did he do that?" I was looking at Sargent, had light glow off skin, and go, "How did he do that?" But it's trying to capture that sense of light, and of course that's what we do as photographers, is we capture light.
It's that light, isn't it? Yeah.
And then, but you keep up you look for inspiration for things that interest you, of course, and there are probably 3 photographers today whose work I really follow very closely, and they continue to inspire me. So,
and who would that be?
Well, one is Michael Kenna. He's a British photographer who lives in the Pacific Northwest, and he does landscapes, just unbelievably moody, magnificent, long exposure landscapes on film with the medium format cameras. Wow. His work in Japan has been particularly helpful for me, because I do a lot of work in Japan too. Okay. Then there's Keith Clark, who's an American out of Texas, who's is much more artistic photographer, in that he's got a very unique vision of life, and he captures it in kind of a wacky way sometimes, and very moving ways. They're all very heavily imbued with emotion. As is Kenna, but Kenna's a little more restrained, and he steps back 1 or 2 steps. The other photographer whose work I really admire is Sally Mann. She's out of Virginia, and has done some really interesting work over the last 30 years with. She started with her family. It was very controversial because she had a lot of the kids nude or semi-nude, and she was getting federal grants at the time, and that caused a stir. But she's become much more introspective in her own work, and focused on things like the South and the legacy of the South, and through landscapes, as well as she did a series of work with there are places that will take cadavers and have them decomposed in the grounds for scientific purposes, and she got permission to go in there and photograph these cadavers in states of decay. And really, it sounds kind of bizarre, but it's really interesting work. Anyway, she's quite good. And the thing that ties them all together is that they're all primarily black and white photographers in terms of their work, and they're all primarily film photographers. Or in the case of Sally Mann, she does she does liquid plates, so it's a very old approach. Yes. But that's 20 years ago, I probably would have been photojournalists who would have inspired me more. But right now, it's those 3.
Okay, well, thanks for sharing them, because I mean that will, for even the listeners, expand the repertoire of fine arts photography, for those who aren't fine art photographers, but a great appreciation for visual arts. Now, why do you feel that you had to capture the cultural traditions and the people of Oceania and Micronesia? Is it because you believe that you're growing up in Majuro as your childhood and residing in the area?
Well, that's part of it. It's not a really big part of it, because as I discovered, the older I get and the more often I go out there, and I go out there quite a bit. When you get to the point where you can reference places that used to be on the island, and most of your people who you're talking to don't have no idea what you're talking about. It's a little bit different in terms of the understanding what contemporary life is like today. So you don't want to be living in the past too much.
Yeah.
But I think part of it is driven by the fact that here in Hawaii, where I live now, there's a fairly large, or very, it's not that large, it's maybe 15,000, 20,000 people, Micronesian population from the Marshall Islands and the Federated States of Micronesia in particular. And they have a pretty bad reputation for being on welfare, and it's not a very positive view of their cultures, of the people. And it irritates me to no end that they are seen that way. And so part of my work here is to try to engage local folks with a different understanding of what these islands are like,
right,
for physical beauty. And the book you referenced, the Xavier High School book, School on the Hill, I had an exhibit at one of the galleries that I used to be a member of here, and we had a good crowd show up, and I was there one weekend when these two middle-aged women were looking very curiously at some of the photographs, and had a very kind of puzzled look on their face. So I went up and introduced myself, and they said, "Where were these photographs taken?" And I said, "They were taken in Micronesia, in Chuuk, Chuuk State, formerly Truk." And they looked at each other and said, "Micronesia?" Well, it turned out they were both public school teachers in an elementary school next to one of our public housing projects, where a number of Micronesians live. And they were dealing with issues like students who didn't speak English and couldn't acculturate, parents who were probably working 2 or 3 jobs and never showed up for parent-teacher meetings,
right,
and just the issues that come with an immigrant population. And they looked at these pictures of freshly scrubbed, successful, academically high achiever students, and they could not understand it. And so I like to think that after spending 45 minutes or so at the show, that they came up with at least the understanding that it's more complex than they thought it was, and that's the beginning.
Right. So you want to break down those barriers, essentially. The prejudices that happen, because I did hear about a lot of the discrimination among the Micronesian population, particularly in Hawaii and of course in the stateside also, and bringing that, and that's what I'd like to commend you. I mean, as far as educating the populace on the region, more or less.
Well, that's part of it. I mean, part of it too is just to capture a beautiful image.
Yes.
So
yes.
I'm not going to try to. I'm not mission driven totally by the changing people's ideas.
But that's part of it. That becomes a part of it, though. Yeah.
It is. In that particular case, it is. And then I had a similar opportunity, somewhat similar, when I had a commission by some folks I know who were developing a new hotel in Chuuk to go down there for a couple of weeks and photograph the Chuuk Lagoon, which is huge, gorgeous, big, stunning place, and for photographs to hang in their hotel and the rooms and the public areas. And so I was there, and the light just happened to be gorgeous at most of the 2 weeks, where there was just magic light, very, very crystal clear. And that show has taken on a life of its own, that series where I had an opportunity to have a solo show in Tokyo.
Oh, wow.
And that show has now been in 5 venues over the past year and a half. Probably our 6th venue this fall, and probably the last one. But there have been a good number of people in Japan who've seen the beauty of these islands, and I've gotten really good responses from that.
That's amazing. Are you concerned about climate change and the future of the small island states that you have painstakingly documented and captured through words in your lens? Because I feel that has been quite a topic lately.
Well, sure. And anybody who goes to an atoll, which the Marshall Islands are almost all atolls, the various 33 or so islands. When you stand in an atoll with 2.5, 3 square miles of dry land, and the highest point is 6 feet above sea level, you're very focused on climate change.
Absolutely.
But part of it too is what I can do now is try to document in my own personal way the life and of this place now, so that if those with much more influence than I can begin to slow the process or not, there will be a record, particularly for the local folks, who of what the place was like. And so when in the ideal world, in their mythology of from 30 or 50 or 100 years from now, if their images still exist, that they'll have a record to say this is what it was like then.
That's great. Have you ever explored other art forms and genres, like maybe theater, poetry, anything like that?
I'm not a very good poet.
Have you tried?
I've never felt very comfortable with it, but that was before I became much more focused on just being more introspective about my work. I've got a number of friends who are very good poets, published poets, and I pretty much leave that to them and you to.
Well, I was just curious because as artists, a lot of artists become, are usually multidisciplinary. They kind of, do other things. I know I do, so that's why I was just curious. Maybe you have, other talents and stuff that you like to share.
Well, so far the photography primarily, and some of the backed up by the writing, but really the photography is keeping me pretty busy.
Well, it's spectacular. I was just curious if you had other outlets that that you do also. What are your current projects and your future goals?
The largest current project is for photography related is in the Marshall Islands, where I'm working with a group, a local group that's developing a new hotel on an atoll called Jalowit. Beautiful, big, incredibly gorgeous place. And by hotel, it's a pretty small operation, but what really intrigued me about it, the developer is a Marshallese fellow he's a former president of the country and a very high chief. He and his wife are both very high-ranking traditional leaders. And part of it is their sense of obligation to give back to their people, to provide jobs on these places with almost no opportunity. And it's going to take a Herculean effort, but it'll work. And so I brought together a group of consultants, including myself, to help them reimagine their current small property, and then plan for a second one on a different atoll. And we're well into the first phase, and it's looking very exciting. And I think we're going to have a good start for that. And my role is to help kind of corral everybody, keep them focused, use my knowledge of the area and the people to help keep things not check, but keep them focused on the family values of the family, and then do my own photography too.
So you get to do, a big project like that and actually see it come to life, and Well, we did some really. I just came back about a week and a half ago, and we were there on the atoll for about a week,
And part of it was I was doing some photography of a Marshallese sailing canoe at full speed and across the lagoon. And so if you can imagine a dark blue lagoon, bright blue sky, and a yellow canoe.
Oh my goodness!
With a yellow sail that was moving at about 15 knots. It was just hauling. And they've got a long, big outrigger that was up in the air, up to about 8 feet above the surface of the ocean. And we were barely keeping up in a powerboat with it while I was shooting, and got some great photographs, really stunning photographs. And we got so much water over us that the president was with me in the chase boat that my camera just died.
Oh no!
But I was able to get some good shots. The card survived.
Do you carry a camera with you everywhere, practically?
Well, I do if you can consider an iPhone a camera, which most of us do these days. And I've pretty much decided that that's the easiest way to do it. And I've used some of my iPhone photographs have been published.
I didn't know that. Really? So iPhone is like really pretty high-tech stuff for photography.
Well, it's so good. Well, the change came about 6 or 7 years ago when I think Time magazine first published a cover based on an iPhone photograph.
Wow!
And at that point, the world changed for photojournalists, and you always rely on that to be your some cases primary, in most cases backup camera. I do carry. I'm moving towards smaller kits, just easier to carry and easier on the back. But the quality of the digital imaging is so good. But then again, I'm also doing a lot of work with film again. So and those are bigger cameras.
I was going to ask you that. Do you still work with film?
I do, and I do a lot of work with film actually, and it's a good, for me, a good discipline to help keep your photography fresh, because film is about trying to create and with less, and you focus on making the most of what you have, and that carries over very well into digital photography, I find.
I see. Yeah, it's almost like a discipline. It disciplines you.
It is if you only have 36, 24 exposures.
Exactly. Well, Floyd, it's been great talking to you and learning more about you and your work. I wish you the very best of luck, and thank you for all the awesome things you are doing for the Pacific region, sharing moving photographs and stories of the people and places there, touching our hearts and educating folks about this part of the world. And if our paths cross someday, I hope that I get a chance to sit and talk to you for a while.
Well, thank you. And I look forward to seeing you back out this part of the world again.
I know. You never know. You never know.
You never know.
I tell you, life is like that, right?
That's right.
Well, everyone, that is it for now. Please tune in next week for my next featured guest. In the meantime, have a productive and creative week. Bye, Floyd.
See you.